Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To some of you and peace out to the rest of you. You know who it is, what to press, and the reason for it. So let me get straight to it. I realized this is sudden, and when I took a poll, I asked what topics you wanted me to cover in the next live stream. Now, that poll is still up. I'm waiting to get to at least 100 votes. As of a short time ago, was at 61. But I'm putting this one up for a different reason. Something came up, you could say. Something that I realized needed to be addressed by the community while still waiting on at least 100 votes for the other topic. Now, as far as the other topic goes, right now, SYSBM and repatriation, not reparations, but repatriations. And SYSBM is the winning topic. Now that some of you were here, at least one of you is, I want to give you time to go ahead and hit the share button for some other people too. I'm going to also send something out on my end. I'm going to alert a few people now that I've got, now that I have an address for this, and I'm going to go ahead and alert some other people right now. Send this link out to some folks. Forgive the sound of the keyboard. Okay, I've gone ahead and sent that out, share that with some folks. Okay, now, this being said, wa alaikum salam, Art Zuck. How do I respond to that, Mr. Stewart? Assalamu alaikum, Mr. Stewart. Art Zuck, I'm glad you're here because your homeland is one of the places that I'm going to have to address. And when I give an address to non-Black Muslims, I'm going to have give a different address to your nation, your neighbor, Malaysia, and the Philippines next door, somewhat to the non-Muslim nations in your region like Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, maybe Vietnam as well. I'm sure I'm forgetting about some other countries because I don't have a mental map in my head, in my memory yet of that region. But I'll have to give a different address to your people, so I'm glad you're here. Art Zuck, when this is done, or even now if you want to, please take this link and share it with some others of your folks. And if you know anybody from Malaysia, share it with them too. If you know anybody from the Philippines, share it with them as well. Now, I'm aware that in the Philippines, they speak a different language, but most of them can speak English much like you can and much like people in Malaysia. And this message will be in English. I don't have much that I'm going to have to say in Arabic at this point. I'm going to have to find a name of a particular lady that made the news in your neighbor's country. I'm looking for her name now. Okay. Not finding her. I'm still looking. Okay. There's a model. Thanks a million. Teddy Makasi Artzak. There's a model. She's the former Miss Universe of Malaysia that made some comments. And I'm aware that this is not in your nation, but it's in the neighboring country. I'm also aware that everybody in her nation was against it. They did not side with her. Maybe it's a good thing I didn't find her name. I was just trying to prove the case, to prove the existence of the event itself. But I'm not really going to, I'm not going to dwell on the name. That's not really important anyway. Okay, here's the deal. The first thing I'm going to say to the archipelago nations, when I say archipelago, I'm referring to Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines first. And to a certain extent, I could include other parts of Southeast Asia like southern Thailand, but I'm mostly referring to the Muslims in this case. What I'm going to say to the other non-Black Muslims, I don't necessarily have to say to you, because you don't have a history of siding with the oppressors against the oppressed. And quiet as it's kept, there's a history that your people have of solidarity with other oppressed peoples that many of you don't know and many of my people don't know. The Bandung Conference was held in the 1940s, I believe. And this was when representatives from all of these colonies at that time got together. There were colonies in Asia and in Africa, and they got together. At this point, the Americas were no longer colonized. At this point, most of the Americas were in fact independent, but there were some British and French colonies there. The Caribbean islands, many of them were still colonies at this point. But these representatives from all of the representatives from all of these colonies around the world got together, most of them from Africa and Asia, and they came to one realization. They came to understand that they had similar colonizers. They saw what their colonizers had in common. Give me a second, y'all. You okay? Okay, all right. Fiantai? Okay. Just checking. I'm still live though. All right. So they realized that these colonizers not only came from Europe, but that they came from Western Europe. And that these colonizers had taught these colonized people to feel that their inferiority was in the blood, that it was genetic, that they were not colonized simply because this is what empires do to others, but that they were colonized and that they deserved to be colonized because they were not of the same bloodline as the ones who colonized them. They were taught racial inferiority if they didn't have these concepts already. This was the Bandung Conference. Bandung is in Indonesia. The people in Indonesia did not riot against this conference. I believe Indonesia at that time was still a colony, or it had just been independent. I don't know the independence date of Indonesia or of Malaysia, but I think this was shortly before they became independent. Art Zuck can correct me if I'm wrong, but this conference was in the 1940s. And the people in the area did not riot against the conference. They did not protest against the conference. They actually understood the truth of it. Therefore, all I need to tell people in the archipelago nations, and I'm including the Philippines in that because they're also islands detached from mainland Asia. You don't have a history of enmity with darker people. Good. But you all in that region do have a particular symptom of the brainwashing. All y'all got to realize is that you are gorgeous the way that Allah made you, period. So what I'm saying is you all need to throw out the skin bleach. It's on the shelves everywhere, at least in Malaysia. I already know this. I was in Malaysia. I saw soaps. I saw different creams, just regular run-of-the-mill lotions. Okay, so 1945. So I think that was the year after. I remember the Bandung being in 1944, but my memory might be wrong. It might have been 1948 that the Bandung Conference was held. But it looks like the Bandung Conference was held right after the independence, whatever the case was. So, but in our archipelago, in Indonesia and Malaysia and in the Philippines, and even in other parts of Southeast Asia too, but I'm talking mostly to the Muslims. Y'all need to throw out the skin bleach, and you also need to throw out whatever reason you have that it can be so popular and sell so much in those nations. If skin bleach, which itself is really a symptom of an underlying sickness, but if skin bleach can sell, then that means that there's a mental defect somewhere, an inferiority complex. And you got to fix that complex in the mind, and you got to throw out the bleach. This is something the society has to do. So it's not Art Zuck's job to do this by himself. Art Zuck, you have to tell your people, you got to share this link with them. You got to tell folks in Malaysia too, because they also speak Bahasa. You got to focus on the Muslims. You got to tell the Muslim Indians that live in Malaysia. You got to tell any of the Muslim Chinese that they got to be against this too. You got to tell the Orang Asli that they got to throw it out. If you see Orang Hitam, you see black people in either one of these nations and they're using skin bleach, you got to let them know, look, you don't need to use it. You're fine the way that Allah made you. Allah didn't make any mistakes. And when I was in Malaysia, both times, I saw people with their kids. The archipelago nations have some of the most adorable children in the world, bar none. I'm putting them right up there with African kids. I'm sitting up here telling it's between us. Once you were not looking in Africa and this part of the world, you just don't find cuter kids on average. That's a high compliment coming from me, because everybody that has heard from me before knows I'm militantly pro-black. But see, this does not mean that other people need to have an inferiority complex, especially when they don't have a history of siding with the oppressor against the oppressed, because that's when people become inhuman. Nobody is inhuman or less human because of their origin. I mean, if that's the case, you're already another species. But if you were human, walking on two legs and speaking some sort of organized language, like what we do, we know human beings when we see them. And if you were human, you're not born more or less than somebody else. You got to grow up, make moral choices that make you better or worse than the next person. And nobody knows everybody else's moral choices. So nobody starts off better than anybody else. We may start off luckier, but we don't start off our childhood coming straight out the womb better than somebody else because they come from a different womb with a different DNA sequence. And so it's going to be the job of you, the Muslims in Southeast Asia, to start this and to start telling each other, throw out the skin bleach. We look the way we were supposed to look. This is where we're from. We're from the tropics. We're from the equator. We don't need to bleach ourselves out trying to look more like the Chinese or like the Europeans. And who are they anyway that we should imitate them? This is what we got to be careful about. We got to throw out that inferiority complex. You don't have anything else to work on at this point. You are not a nation that favors white folks over black folks. I already know. When that former Miss Universe Malaysia model said that blacks should relax because they chose to be born colored, which was not true. Nobody chooses that. The fact remains that most Malaysians were against her. As soon as they heard it, they said, no, 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 no. For one, the statement can't possibly be true. But number two, most Malaysians pretty much were upset with her because she was siding with the Bule people, as you call them, or as they say in formal Bahasa, the Putih people. She was siding with him against the Hitam. And for what? They looked at her and they said, see, this is a moral travesty, a moral outrage. You take people that are being oppressed and you tell them they need to relax, and you have nothing to say to the people that are oppressing them, even though the oppressor's own people are coming against them. You see, all y'all got to do in Southeast Asia, talking to you Muslims, is throw out the inferiority complex and throw out the bleach. Get rid of it. It should not sell. Matter of fact, you all should be pressuring your governments to make them illegal, just like narcotics. You all should be pressuring your governments to make them just as illegal as shabu, as crack, as cocaine. And in some of these nations, you smuggle the drugs in, the penalty goes up. You use them, you go to prison. You smuggle them, you get executed. Bleach should be treated the exact same way. Any soaps manufactured with a bleaching agent in them should be illegal, on penalty of death for mass production, mass transport, or smuggling them in, and prison time for using them knowingly. If you cannot change this, because I'm gonna tell you, black folks are waking up, and you're not the enemies of black people. And I'm gonna talk to my own people about this black annoyance, this black paranoia we have. But right now, you've never been the enemies of black folks, and our people are waking up. If you throw this out, this inferiority complex and its manifestation of high skin bleach, then you're not necessarily going to be the enemy in the future. Because at this point, we're taking some of our own people as enemies. People in the Caribbean nations like Jamaica and people in the continent who use bleach, we're starting to take them like something's wrong with them, like they're not normal, like they're holding us back, like they're race traitors. And every day we get more militant about it than we were before. All you got to do as Muslims is throw that out, because you insisting on doing this, man or woman, you insisting on doing this is like saying that Allah made a mistake by making you brown. And I seek refuge in Allah from ever thinking this way about Allah. He doesn't make mistakes. Your noses, your lips, and your hair and your skin look exactly the way they were supposed to look for that climate. Allah knew what he was doing when he made you. He doesn't need any correction. So throw this out, and we're not going to mistake you for, we're not going to turn around and mistake you for an enemy later on in the future. Because I don't want to see this. I don't want to see such a sweet-natured people be mistaken for a hostile enemy because another oppressed person had to defend themselves proactively and then mistook you for hating them when in fact you just may not have hated them, but you still had an inferiority complex to a certain extent. We have it too. Understand this. Keep this in mind. I want you Malay folks and those of you in the Philippines to understand we do also have this, but we're fighting it. We're getting rid of it. And I would say the same thing to the Muslims in India. But we've already had this conversation. And they've already, our communities have had this conversation, and they're not going to change. And frankly, I don't give a rat's behind what white folks do to them in the future. I would, because I'm talking about Indian Muslims, but because they have collectively said, and not the young people, but because their elders who control their communities have collectively said, we're not going to change even if you're right and we're wrong. Okay, fine. Deal with the penalty when it comes to you. And this is what I got to say to the other non-black Muslims, not the ones from the archipelago, but Muslims that ain't black coming in from the subcontinent, Southern Central Asia, India, Pakistan, to a certain extent, Bangladesh sometimes, Afghanistan, Iran, the Middle East, Arabic-speaking nations, even North Africa. Coming from the northern part of my continent with an attitude problem towards my people. We've heard the things that you said before. And I'm going to give a brief rundown for you younger folks, you younger members of these communities who oftentimes do have a sense of solidarity and you don't mean us any harm. I'm going to give y'all some history. Many of you that are activists are joining us and you're in your 20s. Some of you are in your 30s and you still have a sense of fair play and you're not the enemy. But nonetheless, what's happening, man, of tomorrow? How's it going, Mr. Torres? Yeah, elderly people do oftentimes, they give wisdom and they give experience, but then they also try to pass down mistakes. And I'm not going to be honest, Mr. Torres, our people have done the same thing. I'm not going to let black folks off the hook just because I'm black. Fair is fair, right is right, wrong is wrong, just is just. Malcolm said, I'm for truth no matter who tells it, and I'm for justice no matter who it's against. And I'm going to say this. Our people have this issue too. Men of Tomorrow and I have talked about how some of these, some people from a previous generation, the baby boomers, messed up the relationship between black men and black women in the West because these these old nigger fools, there's no nicer way to put it, were telling us things that were not fair to men. And in the long run, they wound up not even being fair to women either. Telling us to deal with the hypergamous instinct and feminist doctrine at the same time and try to satisfy both. So that being said, I'm going to tell the you non-black Muslims coming in from the Middle East and adjacent areas, i.e. Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran, and largely India too. What happened in the United States was that back in 2000, no, I'm gonna start before that. Before Malcolm X even made the Hajj, before he learned about what Elijah Poole was doing with his secretaries, before he learned all of this, someone came to him and said, listen, how do you respond to the difference between your doctrine and the doctrine of many Muslims in other parts of the world? And Malcolm said, they jumped over us to go and bring Islam to white people who hated them. This is what Malcolm said. Now, this is before. So in other words, what Malcolm was saying at this point was he didn't give a rat's behind if the doctrine was correct or not, because he couldn't tell what doctrine was correct or not, except based on the moral character of its people. And if you came into the United States and you had the correct doctrine, but you applied it by trying to further marginalize the oppressed or ignore them or act like they weren't being oppressed and trying to appeal to their oppressor, acting like the oppressor was normal and the victim was somehow abnormal. If this is what you were doing, then it didn't matter what you said you believed in, you didn't act it out. That's what wound up being the case. End of story. Now, later on, he found out what Elijah Poole was doing. He made the statements about John F. Kennedy. He got suspended. He realized that he was being whiteballed. I don't call it blackballed. And we know the story. His sister Ella Collins footed the money. That's a real sister. Footed the money. He went on Hajj. He found that Elijah Poole had not been telling the truth about what they were supposed to believe if they're going to say they're Muslims. And he came back and he said, or rather he went back, because I'm not there with y'all no more. And I don't plan on going back to live. He went back and he said, Islam has a solution for America's race problem. And he was right. It has the solution. But what I got to tell you non-black or semi-black Muslims is that you're not applying it. You were siding with the wrong one. You were siding with the oppressor over the oppressed. Not so much you younger ones in your 30s and under. Really, some of you in your early 40s are pretty much woke. But what happened is that for those of you that are in your 20s, you may have been too young to remember or to understand what happened. Because see, what Malcolm talked about was a pattern back then. And what Malcolm did not know was that in the 1920s, I think it was the 1920s or the 1910s, Syrians had gone to the United States and they were first considered black. And then they sued the government to be considered white. They didn't say, wait a minute, the way you treat black folks is wrong. They said, no, 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 we're white. That's what they did. Now, there's a reason for it. I get it, but I don't forgive them. I don't overlook it. They did it because they weren't taking Islam seriously. And they started with the oppressor against the oppressed. They have descendants. Now, they were both Christians and Muslims, but they have descendants in the United States to this day that are no longer Muslims. They chose to blend in and they got it. At what expense? So this was a pattern. And then in the 1970s, when Indians were allowed to come into the U.S., or rather to go there with you all as doctors and engineers and also Pakistanis, what wound up happening? Well, see, in the 70s, we began to find out their attitudes towards melanin, dark skin, even between their own people. And the irony is that they keep this. When they form diasporan communities abroad, they keep these ideas. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't see why the Kenyans, those of you Indians that live in Kenya, I don't know why the black Kenyans don't just drive you out forcefully. I don't know why they don't do what Uganda did to you, rather what Idi Amin did to you in Uganda. I don't know why they don't, because an Indian from India that went to visit Kenya met Indians that were from Kenya and said they still haven't learned to treat black folks as equals, and they're living in a black country. So he's the one that said to me, he doesn't know why the Kenyans don't just drive you all out. If it was up to me, I would tell India, take these MFs back. And if I don't hear back from the embassy in 24 hours, I'm just going to put them in the ocean and tell them to swim back home. Because you don't come into African soil and disrespect black African people. Talking to you, some of you North Africans as well. Not all of you do this, but there are a lot of you that do. And if you so much as think that a lighter shade is more beautiful than darker skin, I don't accept that as a personal opinion. Between black Americans, I do, because it's a personal opinion. Some have that opinion, some have the opposite. Most have no opinion about shade at all. But you, as a culture, have this opinion that the oppressor's phenotype is not only more handsome, but that it's human nature to feel that way. You think that God gave all of humanity an instinct to prefer the oppressor's phenotype. So you're blaspheming against God. You're insulting Allah. And you call it culture. And you want to justify and say, well, it's just a personal thing. I've had a lot of Arabs tell me, oh, Rai Shuksi, that means a personal view. No, how come it's in the culture then? Why is it that when I said I prefer to marry someone from the continent, and I meant from the tropics, you asked me about it or said I was crazy, or your kids laughed. Your 3- and 4-year-old kids would laugh at that. But then when I would ask you, well, do you not prefer to marry them? You would say, yeah, we don't. And nobody laughed at you because your culture is jacked up. So when you went to the States, all y'all, when y'all went to the States, your attitude began to show, and we got sick of it. And so then it came to a head back in 2000 during the election. Those of you in your 20s, you might remember and not understand it, or you may not have even remembered it. What happened is, I remember this conversation. I wasn't Muslim at that point, but I was living with some Muslims. Only one was black, Sudanese, and he wasn't sure how to feel. He felt that there was no candidate that was going to be good enough. But all the Muslims that weren't black were saying, well, we can't elect Al Gore because Joe Lieberman is his running mate and he's going to look out for Israel. I told him anybody's going to look out for Israel. Everybody, it doesn't matter, Democrat or Republican, the foreign policy of the United States towards Israel has never changed. At no point has the United States government ever sided with Palestine against Israel, and they're not going to. That's not how this works. You came thinking you were going to change the system from within. Yeah, good luck. We were brought over and we can't change it from within. So we had these conversations. But the communities were having it too. And African Americans, Muslim and not, tried to tell the Muslim community in the United States, Bush is going to fight you in an all-out war. So either if you're not going to vote Democrat, then don't vote at all, because Bush is not going to support you. We know how he is. He calls you a sand nigger. He represents the ones that called you sand niggers behind your back. And the Muslims that were not black said to all black folks, Muslim and Christian alike, your parents said, you niggas talk about racism too much. If you would just work hard, you could pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. Your parents said the exact same things to us that white supremacists used to say. The ones that were pretending that they weren't white supremacists, that is. They said the exact same thing. America's this great country of opportunity. You didn't understand, and you didn't let black folks tell you that that's not the way it works. And your parents kept cutting off and interrupting black folks who were trying to tell them this stuff. Well, I came with nothing, but I worked and I got ahead. No, you came with something. You came with something. Or your parents, rather, they came with at least a plan to go to the States. I knew a Syrian guy. He was actually my landlord for a while. Nice guy. But one of the things he said was, Brother Black, I came to America and I did not speak English. And I had, wallah, I had $200 when I came. And I said, okay, all right. So what did your relatives that were in the U.S. say about you coming to the U.S. with no knowledge of English and $200? I forgot what his answer was, but he told me that they had some idea. The fact that they were in the States told me, see, you came here with your people. You came to the States and your relatives were already here and you planned it. So you cannot compare your entry into the United States with my people's entry into the United States or any other part of the Americas for that matter. Because if you go to Jamaica, it's the same thing. We weren't sitting on the coast of Africa asking to go to Barbados and they brought us to the US. We weren't sitting on the coast of Africa asking to go to the US and they took us to Brazil. That's not how it worked. We weren't asking to go anywhere. And it wasn't until they came and got us that more of you decided you wanted to go to America, the land of opportunity. And also Brazil. And also Jamaica and Barbados. Oh yeah, y'all didn't see, y'all may not have known, but many of your people also wanted to go to other countries in the Americas that used to be colonies whose economies depended on slave labor. Yeah. So next thing I'm gonna say to y'all is you younger ones, as I've said before, you're gonna have to go back and argue with your elders. And you're going to have to tell your elders some very uncomfortable things. And if you don't want to tell them, then you can play this tape or this audio and I'll tell them. If they are not going to understand that, if they're not going to understand that this situation is about the same as what's happening in Palestine, and it actually began long before what happened in Palestine, then they should not say anything to us the next time that the United States turns around and goes in, that the white American society turns around and goes in on them, or for that matter, the Danish or the Swedes, excuse me, or the Dutch or the Germans or the French, when they do the things they do, the little microaggressions or the outright aggressions, or the British. The next time they go through anything, they shouldn't say anything to us and ask us for our help. Now, I'm going to give an example. Jamila Arshad became a Muslim in her adult life, and she became a physician. She was in DC, and I think that she worked in New Orleans, Louisiana for a while. But Jamila Arshad became a practicing physician in DC at some point. I think she got her training in New Orleans because actually a lot of US doctors have some training to do in New Orleans, because Charity Hospital used to be the busiest hospital in the United States at one point. I don't know if it's even still there or not. Jamila Arshad was driving home one day and she saw a boy get hit by a car, and he was on his bike, and she pulled over to try to render aid and to resuscitate the boy. A white guy pulled up and said, "What are you doing to that boy?" And she said, "I'm a doctor and I'm trying to help him." And he called the cops and he said, "There's a black lady here. And there's a boy on the ground injured. She says she's a doctor trying to help, but I don't believe her. Could you send someone?" The police came and they body slammed her, handcuffed her, put her in the car, locked her in the back, left her there for a little while they tended to the boy. And she went into cardiac arrest, handcuffed in the backseat of a locked car, went into cardiac arrest, and they ignored her while she kicked the car. When they went back to the car, they found her dead, foam at the mouth. And even then, they did not immediately try to put her into an ambulance. That's Jamila Arshad. I had to find out about this from an imam because her story was not even made famous. She was African-American and she was Muslim. A lot of the Muslims didn't know about her situation. The ones that did know didn't necessarily say much. They didn't publicize it. And we've been saying that if it's us today, it's going to be other people tomorrow, because remember, before we were the victims in the Americas, the original Americans were the first victims. And the truth be told, I'm gonna really drop a bombshell on y'all for this one. you share in the guilt. All right, Artzuk, I'm sorry, man. I'm talking loudly, I know, but when you can listen to the playback, and you can play it at 0.75 speed, and then my voice will be slower because I understand I'm speaking English quickly, and if it's a second language, it is hard to understand it as quickly as I speak it. I go through the same thing in Arabic. Arabs talk fast and then look at me like, "Why don't you understand?" I mean, you talk like a machine gun. So I try to slow it a little bit. But look, when it comes down to it, one of the reasons that this all started was Columbus's voyage, 1492. And Arabs, you love to talk about how we used to have Spain in our grasps and how that civilized Europe. Well, understand that in 1492, that was when the last two emirs had control of Spain for like a day. Actually, one of them did. And before 1492, there were two of them, two remaining. Hold on a second. I just explained that some people are not the enemy. I just explained that. That's what I was talking about. Blackanoia is properly applied to people that are the enemies. People from the archipelago are not the enemy. They never have been. Even everybody from the Arab world and from Pakistan and Iran and India are not necessarily enemies. The young ones usually are not. They're just clueless, but the elders are outright enemies. They're just not quite the same way as the white supremacists are. So what I'm doing just now, putting one of you on timeout, is not anything personal. It's just to be fair. As militant as I am, I also got to be fair. And Artzuk does not represent the enemy here. I've been to the neighboring country where the people speak the same language as his people. They come from the same origins. They're not the enemy. I've been saying this on multiple videos. When you go into tropical Southeast Asia, those folks do not hate us. We don't have to be harsh with them. We don't have to put them in their place because they don't hate us. They've actually handled the inferiority complex a lot better than we have to a certain extent for decades. But anyway, going back to this. The elders have to be told that in actuality, losing Spain was one of the reasons. And one of the reasons that they lost Spain was that they became enamored with the Spanish women, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed women, not the Moorish women, not the Arab women, but they became enamored with the Spanish women. And they stopped taking them. Well, make a long story short, you had two emirs, two Muslim emirs that held provinces in Spain before 1492. They were brothers to each other. One sold the other one out. Got you, Mr. Stewart. One of them sold the other one out. And then when 1492 came, in 1492, the one that had sold his brother out was betrayed by the Catholic king and queen. Ferdinand and Isabella had cut a deal with him that he would betray his brother and they would leave him alone. 1492 came and they turned around and turned on this guy. He was the last Muslim emir. He held Granada. That was the last province. His name was Muhammad Abdullah XII. And in Spanish, they call him Boabdil. He had a daughter named Aisha. Boabdil fled. When they came in and they conquered Granada, he surrendered and he fled. He left behind his daughter, Aisha. I'm telling this to you Arabs especially, because y'all the ones that love to brag about how we had Spain. Boabdil fled, left his daughter. His daughter was picked up by King Ferdinand's soldiers and brought to King Ferdinand. He used her as a concubine then put her in a convent when he got tired of her. Officially speaking, she died as a Catholic. I don't know what she actually believed when she died, but the rolls state that she died as a Catholic nun. First, a concubine. Ferdinand knew that he was not supposed to be laying down on top of a Muslim woman, and he was already married to Queen Isabella, so he committed adultery according to his own rules. And he did it with a Muslim woman just to offend the sensibilities of the Muslims. That's the only reason he did that. He did that because you Arabs confess yourselves that y'all got weak in Spain. This is your own confession. You don't say this, and I've noticed you don't say this in front of, black Muslims that you can tell are black. But when I'm around, some of y'all talk like this and admit this. You admit it to each other. So that's how Columbus was the general, or he was high up in that army. Maybe not the general, I'm sorry. But Columbus was high up in that army that went into Granada and took it on January the 2nd or January the 3rd of 1492. Like right after New Year's Day. That was him. That's how he got the influence with King Ferdinand and Isabella to get the funding to make that trip across the Atlantic. And they still told him no the first time, but then they changed their minds and said, yeah, go ahead. Here's the money. That's what wound up happening. So he went and made that journey. And as you all know, that was the end of the Taínos. The Taíno Indians. He went into the Caribbean islands. It's debated which one he landed in first, but the Indians there were from the Taíno tribe, and of course they're gone now. The Arawak were the other tribe in the Caribbean, they're gone now. And then, as we know, other Spaniards followed him, and then they went into the mainland Americas, and of course those Indians that they did not wipe out, they raped and created what you call today the Latino or the Mestizo. And then later on, the Portuguese were already busy in Africa, but the Spaniards went and increased the demand because the Spaniards said to the Portuguese, look, we can't enslave these Indians. It's not working. They're dying. So why don't you sell us some of the people you're taking from the Congo and Angola? And they did. And from there, the rest is history. They destabilized Africa to increase slave supplies. And they were already wiping out the people of the Americas, either by disease or by bullets, or diluting them with rape. We understand that now. So the truth be told, the Black Holocaust, the genocide of the original Americans, is largely due to your neglect in Spain, or your ancestors' neglect in Spain. And why did they become neglectful in Spain? Because that's the culture. Yeah, I said it. The failures of Arab culture are passively to blame, not actively. Arabs didn't commit the rapes and the genocide. I'm not saying that. But the failure of the Arab culture is passively to blame for what happened to the original Americans and subsequently to the Africans who were brought in to replace them. And then subsequently to the African continent itself through colonization. Now, gunpowder had a lot to do with it. I don't exonerate the Europeans, but there were Arabs that wanted to be the Europeans even back then, even while the Europeans were imitating Arabs, imitating other Muslims as well. Even while that was the case, still. So y'all got a lot of work to do. And you younger ones, you may mean well, and I appreciate that. But we can't trust everybody that comes to us. We need to be fair. We need to give a shot. We don't need to be so black-anoid that we don't trust anybody at all. But we also cannot necessarily trust everyone because we see what's already going on. A lot of the looting and rioting are being blamed on us, and every time the video cameras come on, it's not us. So that's one thing that needs to be understood. That's why we can't sit up here and just trust everybody that's coming along and saying, I want to help too. I mean, give them a shot, sure, but you understand why we got to be careful. But you got to keep in mind too, that unfortunately for you younger ones, your parents screwed it up for you. Your parents got on the wrong side. To them, the right side was the winning side. To us, the right side is the moral side. They got on the immoral side. Now the tables are kind of turning, And if you come across some black folk that don't trust you, it's because of your parents. Go back and tell your parents that they screwed up. Go back and tell your parents that they came for the wrong reasons to the United States, and that you don't want any parts of being absorbed by an oppressor's community or society. Let them know this. You're going to have to say some nasty things to your parents and to your, well, rather to your elders in general. You're going to have to let them know. I'm not saying you got to hate them, but you got to say some things to them for which they may hate you. And if they are your own parents, they may tell you, get out of my house, and you may have to go. But that's what you're going to have to say to them. In order for us to really know that you mean it, you may have to go against your own community, or rather the elders in your community, and be labeled a traitor. Now, you know more about that already than what most people think you do, about going against your elders and being labeled a traitor. And then when you do this, when the elders kick you out, don't sit up and say, well, they were Muslim and they kicked me out, so I'm giving up my Islam. No, 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 no. I meant it when I said that Islam is the solution. A lot of non-Muslims in my audience right now, but I do not apologize. I do not apologize for saying Islam is the solution. It always has been. But the problem is that many Muslims who ain't black have taken the solutions out of Islam and then try to give us the rest of the religion without those solutions. Doing something similar in a passive way, but similar to what the Europeans did with Christianity in an active way, actively printing Bibles up that did not have the stories of Moses in them. Actively printing Bibles and taking out the chapters where they leave Babylon, I believe. And I'm going to say something else to you guys, too. You got to stop sitting up here and telling us, well, Bilal was black. Nigga, I'm not your Bilal. You'll always try to present Malcolm as though he was right because he learned to love white people, and that's why he's worth taking seriously. No, 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 no. That's not the case. Malcolm was right because he learned that he said Islam can solve the race problem if America can apply it. But he also said realistically, he did not expect white America to take this solution. And he still started working for his people, and he spoke up for other oppressed peoples, but he worked mostly for his people, and he encouraged other oppressed peoples to do the same thing and to throw off these inferiority complexes. Malcolm did not give up his sensibilities. He simply said he would not blame whites for things they did not do. He was fair to them. He didn't exonerate them, let them off the hook for the things of which they were actually guilty. So that being said, you're going to have to go and reassess what you know. You younger ones are going to have to go and tell your elders they don't know anything about Malcolm compared to what he actually was. And you got to go back and tell them, stop telling black people to follow Malcolm because he learned to love white people like MLK did. No, MLK began to see that Malcolm was right, and that's when they shot him. You got to let your folks know this. You got to tell them straight away. The other thing, too, it ain't just Malcolm. You see, your elders love to tell us that Bilal, they always talk about Bilal like he was the only black companion of Muhammad, peace on him. They always tell us this. Sometimes y'all join them in telling us this. Look, there was more than Bilal, to be honest. Truth be told, Omar had more Ethiopian blood than he had non-Ethiopian blood. Yeah, Omar Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him. He had a bunch of Ethiopian blood, at least half. What do you think Omar looked like? Truth be told, there are hadith that describe Ali ibn Abi Talib, may Allah be pleased with him too, as being Shadid al-Adam Shadid al-Udm. That means dark with severe darkness. Oh yeah, the name Adam means somebody's dark. That's the name Adam. Same spelling in Arabic. Adam Shadid al-Udma. Shadid means severe. So dark with a severe darkness. That's how Ali was described. That's the exact same description that they have for Bilal. So in actuality, darker skin was the default among them at that time. They act like Bilal was the only black one. and that we should follow him because he never hated the lighter-skinned Arabs. Actually, he killed his former slave master too. Would your parents tell us to kill our former slave masters in vengeance? They would tell us to forgive. They're trying to tell us to turn the other cheek. And that's why your parents, your elders are our enemies, point blank. They have not learned to see it the way that we see it, because our view of this is right and their view is wrong. And unfortunately for you younger ones, this black annoyance we have had to have spills over on you. It's not necessarily your fault. I understand that, but a lot of my people don't, because they don't know that you have the same generation gap in your communities that we have in ours. They're not aware of that. If they were, I think things would be different and that would be more fair and just to you. But how are we supposed to know that? We weren't allowed to really learn much about your communities because your elders did not want us to know much about them. And I'm okay with that. Well, your elders didn't, let me rephrase that. Your elders didn't want us to spend much time with them, and I'm okay with that. I do want us to know about them because, see, I know about your communities and I know about the dysfunctions within. And I'm telling my people about them. My people have the unfortunate misconception that all of your communities are so on point because they see you in the United States where the U.S. embassies cherry picked you before they gave you, or cherry picked your elders before they gave them visas to even go to the States to begin with. And they gave them orientation classes in the embassies and consulates back in their home countries before they got on the planes to come, or rather to go to the United States. So you see, my people see the cherry picked ones. And you got to tell your elders the truth about this too. Your elders were cherry picked in order to come or to go to the States, specifically as between them, meaning white folks, and us. That's what they were brought for. And if we black folks did disappear, keep this in mind. White folks need a nigger. They need someone to call a nigger and treat like a nigger. Because white folks are the original niggas, so they have to project the consequences onto some. When I say white folks, I mean the white Western European oppressor is the original nigga, and they have to project the consequences that niggas deserve onto somebody else. And if it's not going to be us, who do you think it's going to be next? They're going to start with the dark-skinned Indians and the Bengalis. And if they vanish, guess what's going to be next? They're going to go to the darker-skinned Arabs. Then they're going to go to the paler skinned. In other words, they're going to move against whoever is the darkest in the room. That's how it works. That's what they're going to wind up doing. So you got to let your folks know a lot of nasty things that they're not going to want to hear. You're going to have to tell a lot of nasty things to your elders and to your parents. And if you can't find it in your heart to tell them, then you need to let them listen to this one. I'm going to tell them certain things. You elders. The truth be told, you may have doubts about the Islam of some black folks when they come around into the masajid. You may feel like you're more normal and we're less normal, but the real truth of the matter is that, simply put, you know as well as we do that back in your home countries, there are people that are just as trifling as some of the worst of us that you find. The difference is you got to leave them behind back home. And what really is the case is that when you go to the United States and then you see us with our trauma because of what we've been through, and you see us having to cut corners in order to survive and to make it, you were reminded of the trifling people you left behind. That's really what the case is. Most of you did not start off poor in your home countries, and you know this. And so you may have seen the triflingness and the poverty from a distance back in your home countries. You may have seen it up close even, but you know it's there. And then you got the nerve to go to the States or Canada and then act like, oh, it's just black people that are this way because they're black. And you don't want to admit that the colonization that made your country's third world, which is why you wanted to leave, is the same oppression that made our community third world, which is why many of us want to leave. You don't want to admit this because then you have to realize that you ain't nothing special. You were just lucky. And it's okay to be lucky if you can thank God for it instead of looking down on the ones that are unlucky or blaming them for their bad luck. You can blame anybody for the choices they make, sure, but you can't blame them for bad luck. And you know this because when you get blamed for bad luck, matter of fact, when someone makes bad luck for you by discriminating against you in the States, you start screaming for black people's help. And what I'm telling you is you elders don't deserve it. And unfortunately, my own people don't know that your kids are innocent because of the way your punk behinds acted. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to address black folk, Muslim or not. And then I'm out. I'm done. Art Zuck, to answer your question, that was funny, Michael. Leave us light-skinned folks the uck for alone. Okay, that was a good spoonerism. But look, Art Zuck, to answer your question, I'm going to type in the search terms that you could look for. No, you know what, Art Zuck? Listen, Art Zuck, if you have Facebook, I'm going to give you the name of somebody who's on Facebook. That this is the name of someone on Facebook. All right, his name is Nabil Obaneche, but Art Zuck, you can save the spelling or copy it down. Now, his Facebook page has this, and he also has a podcast. On his Facebook page, you're going to see it. You're going to see a link to a podcast on Spotify, and he's going to talk about that later on. I'm trying to think. Oh, here's another one. I'm trying to remember, Art Zuck, so give me a moment to remember some names I've forgotten. Sama. Here's another search term. This is an imam in the United States, Art Zuck. He's in New Jersey. He's covered some of it. I'm trying to remember the name of another one. Ah, yes. Okay, now what I'm typing in for you now, Art Zuck, is the actual search term. You can put this the way that I typed it in. You don't have to have the quotation marks, but the way that I just typed this in, you can put this in the search term, and this should give you some more information. Inshallah, I hope it helps. All right, where was I? Yes, about to address black folks. Listen, black folk, we got a problem with black annoying. And that's on the real. We tend to forget, number one, that not everybody's an enemy. Now, we may not have allies per se, but there are people that are neutral, like, for instance, Southeast Asians. They don't really know much about what's going on. I mean, keep in mind, they're actually 12 and 13 hours different from the United States in terms of time zone. Between 11, 12, and 13, depending on which part of Southeast Asia you're in, especially when you're talking about Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. They are very, very far away. So they know a little bit about America and about Black America, but there's not as much as they know. And they don't hate us, but there's not much that they know about us. Not a lot of us are there. Now, I saw plenty of us in Kuala Lumpur. I saw more of us than I expected, African American and Sudanese and Nigerian. So that's changing. But in all honesty, they don't know as much about black folks as what we know about ourselves, obviously. So there is a lot of information they may not have. But these folks are not enemies, not in the least bit. When I went there and I was by myself as a really light-skinned, racially ambiguous looking man, people were nice if I spoke to them, but they were shy. They didn't speak to me first. When I went there with my wife, who was completely recognizable from East Africa, clearly, then people were friendly. They would walk up, whether it was business or they were just being nice. They'd walk up, Salaam alaikum, I'm a tour guide. Now, they didn't do this my first time. Or they'd walk up, Salaam alaikum, I heard y'all speaking 2 languages. What are they? I mean, English and another language. You know, that's what would happen. I got to meet, more folks. And they were more talkative towards me because I was with my wife. So there is no anti-black hatred in these regions coming from the Malay people. The anti-black hatred you might find is going to come from the Chinese Malaysians, and they don't treat you badly, to be honest. They just don't talk to you. I mean, if you really want to know the truth, the Chinese people that are from these countries, they're just quiet. They're not violent, hostile, nothing like that. They're just quiet. They don't socialize with you. You're not Chinese. Do you want to buy something or not? Okay, then buy. That's how they are. The Indians were a different story. I had to shout at a lady because she raised her voice at a black American child. I didn't know the child. The child didn't know me. But I had to get on her about it. I wasn't happy to do it because in America, she'd be black, the lady that raised her voice, if they never saw her hair. But, you know, what I'm saying is that we have to understand that not everyone is an enemy. And we don't need to be making enemies out of people that are not. Even a lot of these younger Arabs and Pakistanis and Indians and Afghans and Iranians that live in the United States and grew up in the US don't hate us. They may be ignorant about a lot of things too, but the ignorance is different from a hostility. Now we have every right to tell them, don't wait till we protest to try to use our momentum to bring attention to Palestine or Kashmir. That's a fair thing to say to them. This is our thing right here. You have your demonstrations. And we can sympathize, and if you want us there, we'll join you too. We can use one to understand the other, but don't sit up and try to take our momentum for yourself. That's the mistake your parents made, and we'll never forgive them. That's a reasonable thing to say to them. But when they don't know about something, then that's different. And we should not assume that they all hate us either. And another thing too is we black folks need to start getting more literate, because we're making a mistake about checking facts. We don't like to read newspaper articles and news reports and police reports if they're online and available. We don't like to do that stuff. We like to look at memes and headlines and hit the share button and tell everybody else, or start talking in platitudes, and we don't like to get details before we give a summary. See, you can give a summary of something if you know the details. You cannot give details if you don't even know the summary. You can't give details if you only know the summary, and we're making that mistake. So we're sitting up here spreading misinformation. Breonna Taylor was in the wrong house. No, she was murdered by cops. They didn't know she was in the room when they shot. They shot her 8 times. But they shot through a wall. They didn't know she was inside. They were shooting at the man that defended himself. Were they wrong? Absolutely they were wrong. But they didn't go in there and see Breonna and shoot at her. They didn't have to. They were already wrong. They had a no-knock warrant. It was for that address, but it was for a different man. And for drugs, which they never found. The problem was that they went about it in the wrong way with a no-knock warrant. That was the issue. Should we march for her? Absolutely, because they don't do this in white areas. That's why we should. But we should not be sitting up here acting like they weren't supposed, like the warrant wasn't even for that house. It's a minor detail until it becomes major. All I'm saying is that we have a case for our liberation without having to make a lot of mistakes, and especially outright lies. We have a case to march. George Floyd. We are out here we're sitting up here now blaming the store owner for his death. No, the store owner was not at the store at the time. The store owner gave permission over the phone to an employee because of what the employee told him. It's not a real bill. Later on, it turned out, I read that the bill was real, but I don't know if that's true or not either. But the employee went on early on, the employee went on record with the news. The owner went on record with the news, and the owner said, I was not there at the store at the time. We have a procedure. The procedure was followed. The procedure is you let the cops know. They don't usually arrest the person. They just ask where you got it from. So nobody expected George Floyd to die. No one except for the cop that sat on his neck. And the other ones probably didn't care. Chauvin definitely expected him to die, or didn't, whatever the case is, he murdered him. But the point is, the store owner didn't call the police, and the one that called the police was not expecting him to be arrested, let alone killed. They didn't sit up and say, we're Arabs and he's black and we're going to get the white cops to kill him. That's not the way this works. And we like to oversimplify this stuff. That's not fair to the non-murderers in the equation. I am not here to exonerate the guilty. What I am here to say is that we should not be out there so quick to blame the innocent. And even if you blame the guilty, you should blame them proportionally to their guilt. Someone does something negligently, not intentionally, you don't blame them the same as if they look at you and look at everything and deliberately decide to cause a certain type of damage. We have every right to be angry, but we do not have the right to be unfair. That's what I wanted to make this understood. Now, that being said, I've been at this for an hour and you all have been patient and I really appreciate it. I've only had about 7 views, maybe. I think the highest we got up to was 8. No, 7. The highest we've gotten up to was 7. What I'm going to ask you all to do is to hit the share button. Art Zuck, I'm sorry for talking so fast, but feel free to play this back later at 0.75, and it should be easier. Over time, this will get easier to understand me. And I might be able to learn more Bahasa in the future, inshallah. We'll see. But yeah, y'all need to hit the share button, period, because black folk need to know this, Muslim and not. Non-black Muslims that whose communities have not respected us need to know this. And non-black Muslims from the archipelago who have never disrespected black folks as a whole also need to hear this message, because they need to throw out the skin bleaching, the inferiority complex, the brainwashing that makes them want to do this. The other non-black Muslims need to throw out the inferiority complex and come to the understanding that in a racial conflict, we're right, white folk is wrong. End of story. And I'm talking white supremacists, because even most white folks are sick of the white supremacists, as you're seeing right now with these protests. And we got to understand that we have every right to be mad at the ones who have done us wrong, and people have done us plenty wrong. And a lot of the world has joined in with the Western European, or even beaten them to it in terms of disrespecting us. But we also have to be fair to the ones that have been lied to about us and the ones that never believed it. I'm not saying we ain't got to be angry and ticked off. I'm saying we still got to be fair and we got to be logical. We're human. We're going to have emotions, including anger. But you do not let your emotions think for you, or you're going to exonerate the guilty and punish the innocent. And I'm going to tell black folks, understand this. I'm a militant pro-black, and I do not exonerate the Western white society for anything. But if you don't get this understood, you still have to be just, logical, and fair, even when your emotions of anger are justified. If you cannot get this, and you start to make enemies that were not your enemies before, and you start to blame the innocent and you exonerate the guilty, I will not fight for you. I already will not go back to the US to do it, because I was 13 trying to wake up black people in my immediate area. 13. And what did they do? Man, I don't want to hear that. Too cool for school. And what you know anyway, like, right? And I'm not going to forgive us for that. So now you can think of me as your ambassador. You can think of me as an ambassador abroad. Consider me to be that. And I'm not going to go back to the home country unless I'm reporting information or to visit. That's the end of it. Not going back to live. My home country is no longer the US anyway. I got to find one. And the continent's got 55 countries. If you in Black America are not going to be worth fighting for anymore, there's a continent back home with 55 nations I can choose from. And if the rhetoric is going to go back home and they're going to be dumbed down and that's a bad place for me to go, Malaysia's looking good. So I got options. That's the thing about passports. But you know, I've already done this once. I've given up my childhood trying to fight for my people that were oppressed. And I can't sit up and say that you've always been worth it. Now, that doesn't mean I'll turn around and join the Klan, because I'm never going to exonerate that society that messed us up the way that they did. Because they did it to other people too. You can ask Art Zuck what the Dutch did in Indonesia. You can ask the Malaysians, what did the British do? You can ask the Indians and the Pakistanis, the people that have disrespected us, what did the British do to your nation when they colonized it? You can ask him. I'm not exonerating the oppressor. But if you're going to not be worth fighting for, if I come to your aid, speak in your aid, and you're going to sit up here and not be worth it, I'm going to stop speaking in your aid. Because right now, it is nothing for me to stop doing this Go do something else that's going to make money under my real name, and simply not care about these social justice issues or just justice in general, and just worry about me making some money so I can spoil my wife and kids. Hell, and myself for that matter. I could do that. I don't want to, but you gotta be, you're not wrong because you're angry. You're wrong when you don't think. You're wrong when you let your emotions think for you, and then you start being unfair, repeating and sharing misinformation, blaming the innocent and exonerating the guilty. Cut that mess out. We cannot justify that. It's not something we can justify. So that being said, thank y'all for listening. Black heart, black mind, blackout. Assalamu alaikum, and power to the oppressed just because the oppressors don't like it.